The rain was coming down so hard that night that the windshield wipers on my old Ford Focus couldn't keep up. I was exhausted, having just finished a double shift at the garage. My fingers still smelling of motor oil no matter how many times I'd scrubbed them. The babysitter, Mrs. Henderson from next door, had texted me 3 times already. Nothing urgent, just that Lily had asked for an extra story and had fallen asleep with her stuffed rabbit tucked under her chin. Lily was 6. She had my late wife's eyes. I was supposed to be home 45 minutes ago. Instead, I was sitting in the parking lot of O'Malley's pub, watching the rain turn the asphalt into a mirror of neon light, trying to muster the energy to go inside. My boss, Richard Thorne, had sent a group text to the entire crew 3 hours ago. End of quarter celebration, drinks on me. Mandatory fun. Mandatory fun. I hated that phrase almost as much as I hated being here. But Richard was the owner of Thorne Automotive Group, a sprawling network of dealerships that included the small service center where I worked as a mechanic. He wasn't a bad guy, generous, in his own way, always remembering the techs' names at Christmas parties. But he was also the kind of man who didn't understand that mandatory fun was impossible for a single dad who had to pay Mrs. Henderson double for every hour past 9. I sighed, killed the engine, and made a run for it. The bar was warm and loud, smelling of stale beer and cheap perfume. I spotted our crew in the back. Mike, Diego, old Jerry huddled round a table littered with empty glasses. And there, at the head of the table, was Richard Thorne. He was a big man, in his late 50s, with the ruddy complexion of someone who spent too much time on golf courses and too little time with his doctor. He was laughing too loudly, his tie loosened, his shirt untucked on one side. When he saw me, his face lit up. Cole, the man of the hour. He gestured expansively. Get this man a drink. I held up a hand. Just water for me, thanks. I can't stay long. Richard's face fell, just for a second, before the jovial mask slid back into place. Nonsense. 1 beer to celebrate. I sat down, accepted the beer I didn't want, and nursed it while the others talked about football and complained about customers. Richard was in rare form, telling stories about the early days of the business, his voice getting louder with each round. I watched the clock on the wall. 9:15. 9:30. 9:45. At 10, Mike and Diego made their excuses. Jerry had passed out in his chair 20 minutes ago. I stood up to leave, but Richard grabbed my arm. Cole, wait. His eyes were glassy, unfocused. He tried to stand and immediately grabbed the table for support. The table tilted. Glasses slid. Whoa, I said, catching his other arm. Easy. I'm fine, he slurred. Perfectly fine. He wasn't fine. He was obliterated. And from the way the bartender was looking at us, he was about to become someone else's problem. Richard, do you have a ride? He blinked at me as if I'd asked him to solve a calculus problem. Ride? I drove. Of course he did. I looked out the window and spotted a brand new Mercedes S-Class, parked diagonally across 2 spaces. There was no way I was letting him get behind the wheel. I'll take you home, I said. It wasn't a question. I canter. He swayed. My car, it'll be here tomorrow. Keys. He fumbled in his pocket and produced a set of keys that probably cost more than my monthly rent. I caught them before they hit the floor. Getting him to my car was an adventure. He was heavy, dead weight, and the rain had intensified into a solid wall of water. By the time I wrestled him into the passenger seat, I was soaked through. He slumped against the window, mumbling something about a quarterly report. Where do you live? I asked. He gave me an address in the hills. Of course he did. The drive was slow, the roads slick, the visibility terrible. Richard snored softly in the passenger seat, his head lolling. I thought about Lily, about Mrs. Henderson's last text. Don't worry, she's fine. Take your time. But Mrs. Henderson had her own life, her own husband, her own need for sleep. I was already on borrowed time. The house, when I finally found it, was a modernist monster of glass and steel. perched on a hillside like it was daring the next earthquake to knock it off. No lights on. No other cars in the driveway. Richard. I shook his shoulder gently. We're here. He mumbled something unintelligible. Richard, come on. You need to get inside. Nothing. I sat there for a moment, rain hammering the roof, the defroster struggling to keep the windows clear. I could leave him here. He was in his driveway. He'd wake up eventually, cold and confused, but alive. That was more than he deserved, honestly. But I thought about my own father, about the nights he'd come home stumbling, about the fear in my mother's eyes. I thought about the fact that Richard had a daughter somewhere. He mentioned her once, in passing, at a company picnic. She was in college now, I think. But still, someone's daughter. I got out, went around to the passenger side, and pulled him out of the car. He was heavier than ever, his legs barely functioning. We made our way up the slick stone path to the front door. Keys, I said. Where's your house key? He patted his pockets vaguely. I reached into his jacket and found another key fob. This one for the house. The door beeped and clicked open. Inside, the house was cold and dark, all hard edges and expensive furniture. I guided him toward what looked like a living room, aiming for a long leather couch. Bedroom, he mumbled. Want bedroom? Of course you do. I found the stairs, half carrying him, and somehow located a master bedroom that looked like it belonged in a magazine. I dumped him on the bed. He immediately rolled onto his back and started snoring. I stood there for a moment, catching my breath, dripping water onto his pristine hardwood floors. I should leave. I should absolutely leave. But he was still in his wet clothes. His shoes were still on. And there was something about the emptiness of this house, the cold sterility of it, that made me hesitate. This wasn't a home. It was a showcase. I found a bathroom, grabbed a towel, and draped it over his pillow. I pulled off his shoes. I considered trying to get his jacket off, but decided that was a boundary I wasn't willing to cross. Instead, I found a blanket in a hall closet and laid it over him. He opened his eyes, suddenly, startlingly clear for just a second. Sarah? It was his daughter's name, I remembered. Not his wife's. His wife had left years ago. No, I said quietly. It's Cole. From the garage. You're home. You're safe. He blinked, confused, and then his eyes closed again. I turned off the light and let myself out. The drive home was a blur of rain and exhaustion. Mrs. Henderson was asleep on my couch when I finally walked in, the television murmuring softly. I woke her gently, apologized profusely, and paid her double what I owed. She patted my arm and told me not to worry, that Lily was a sweetheart. I checked on my daughter before collapsing into bed. She was sprawled across her mattress, one leg hanging off the side, her rabbit tucked under her arm. I pulled her blanket up, kissed her forehead, and breathed in the scent of Hera baby shampoo and warmth and something that was just Lily. I was asleep before my head hit the pillow. The next morning, I woke to the smell of pancakes. For a confused moment, I thought I was dreaming. Lily didn't cook. I didn't cook. Not really. Lily survived on cereal and the occasional frozen waffle. But there it was, unmistakable, butter and maple syrup and something delicious. I pulled on jeans and a t-shirt and padded down the hallway, following the smell, and stopped dead in the kitchen doorway. Lily was sitting at the small table, her legs swinging, a plate of pancakes in front of her. Across from her, looking wildly out of place in my worn-out kitchen, was Richard Thorne. He was wearing the same clothes from last night, rumpled and wrinkled. His hair was a mess. And he was holding a spatula. Mr. Thorne, I said. My voice came out strangled. He turned, and for a moment, we just looked at each other. Then he smiled, a real smile, not the corporate one I was used to. Cole. Good morning. He gestured at the stove. Help, you don't mind. Your daughter let me in. She's quite the little hostess. I looked at Lily. She beamed at me. Daddy, Mr. Richard makes really good pancakes. He said he used to make them for his daughter when she was little. I had no idea what was happening. How had he found my address? Why was he here? And why was he making pancakes in my kitchen like it was the most normal thing in the world? Richard must have seen the confusion on my face. He set down the spatula and wiped his hands on a dish towel, my dish towel, and walked over to me. Up close, I could see the shadows under his eyes, the remnants of last night's indulgence. "Cole," he said, his voice low enough that Lily couldn't hear. "I remember enough of last night to know that you didn't have to do what you did. You could have left me there. You could have let me drive." He paused, and something flickered in his eyes. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." I braced myself. Was he going to fire me? Was this some kind of test? Instead, he asked a question that would change everything. I thought about Richard's face when he talked about his daughter. The grief in his voice. The way he'd said "you're safe" like it was a gift he'd forgotten existed. I thought about my own father, about the nights he'd come home stumbling, about the fear in my mother's eyes. I'd sworn I'd never be that kind of father. I'd sworn Lily would never have to wonder if I'd make it home at night. So far, I'd kept that promise. But at what cost? Exhaustion. Stress. A constant, grinding anxiety about money that I tried to hide from Lily but probably wasn't hiding as well as I thought. Lily appeared in the hallway again. "Daddy, are you coming to watch with me?" "It's the one with the funny dog." I pushed myself off the chair, slipped Richard's card into my pocket, and followed her into the living room. She curled up next to me on the couch, her head against my arm, and I let myself just be present for a while. The dog was pretty funny, actually. That night, after Lily was in bed, I sat at the kitchen table with a notebook and a pen. I wrote down everything: pros and cons, fears and hopes, practical considerations and wild dreams. I wrote until my hand cramped and my brain felt like mush. Then I called the only person who might understand. My mother-in-law, Diane, picked up on the second ring. She always did, as she kept her phone glued to her like a lifeline after Emily died, terrified of missing a call from us, from me, from anyone who might need her. "Cole? Is everything okay? Is Lily all right?" "Everyone's fine," I said quickly. "Lily's asleep. She had pancakes for breakfast." "That's nice, honey. What's wrong?" Leave it to Diane to know there was something wrong before I even said it. I told her about the night before the bar, the rain, the drive to Richard's house. I told her about this morning, about the pancakes and the job offer and the look in Richard's eyes when he talked about his daughter. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Cole," she said finally, "do you remember what Emily used to say about you?" I closed my eyes at the sound of her name. "What do you mean?" "She used to say that you were the most decent person she'd ever met. Not the smartest, not the richest, not the most ambitious, or the most decent. She said you had a way of seeing people, really seeing them, in a way that most people never learn." Diane's voice was soft, full of memory. "She said that's why she fell in love with you. Because you saw her. Not the pretty girl, not the popular near her." I didn't know what to say. I'd never heard that before. "That man, Richard," Diane continued. "He's been seen by a lot of people. By his employees, by his customers, by the whole damn city. But when did someone last really see him? When did someone last look at him and think, this is a person who needs help?" I thought about Richard in the bar, loud and laughing, the center of attention. I thought about Richard in his cold, empty house, calling out for a daughter who wouldn't talk to him. "I don't know," I said. Last night, you saw him. And you helped him. Not because you wanted something, not because you expected anything in return, or just because he needed help. Diane's voice got firmer. That's who you are, Cole. That's who Emily fell in love with. That's who's raising my granddaughter. I wiped at my eyes with the back of my hand. So here's what I think, she said. I think you should take the job. Not because of the money, not because of the hours, although those are good reasons. Take it because it's a chance to be seen yourself. To have someone look at you and see more than just a mechanic. To have someone believe in you. But what if I'm not good at it? The words came out smaller than I intended. What if I fail? What if you don't? Diane countered. What if you're exactly what that place needs? What if you're the kind of manager who actually sees his employees, who actually cares about them as people? Think about what that could mean. I thought about it. About the guys at the garage, Mike with his gambling problem he tried to hide, Diego with his wife's medical bills, old Jerry who kept working because he had nothing else. I thought about what it would be like to have a boss who actually saw them, who actually cared. I'll think about it, I said. I promise. You do that, honey. And Cole? Whatever you decide, Emily would be proud of you. I am too. I hung up and sat in the dark kitchen for a long time. The next morning, I called Richard. I'll take the job, I said. On one condition. There was a pause. What's that? Call your daughter. Today. Even if she doesn't pick up. Even if she hangs up on you. Call her and tell her you love her. Tell her you're sorry. Tell her whatever you need to tell her. I took a breath. Don't let another 8 months go by. Another long pause. When Richard spoke again, his voice was rough. Deal. I started the new job 2 weeks later. The first few months were brutal, I won't pretend otherwise. I made mistakes. I pissed people off. I stayed late more nights than I'd like to admit, learning the ropes, figuring out how to be a boss instead of just a mechanic. But I also started coming home at 5:30 every day. I started making dinner a real dinner, not frozen waffles while Lily did her homework at the kitchen table. I started tucking her in every night instead of just on weekends. And somewhere along the way, something shifted. I stopped just surviving and started living. Richard kept his word too. He called Sarah that day. She didn't pick up. He called the next day, and the next. He called every day for 3 weeks before she finally answered. I don't know what they said to each other. He never told me, and I never asked. But a few months later, he mentioned in passing that she was coming home for Thanksgiving. His voice when he said it, careful, hopeful, terrified, sounded exactly like mine did when I talked about Lily. Some things, it turns out, are universal. As for me and Lily, we're doing okay. Better than okay. Last week, she brought home a drawing from school. It showed 2 stick figures holding hands in front of a house with a chimney. One figure was labeled Daddy. The other was labeled me. Above them, in wobbly first-grade letters, she'd written, My home. I have it taped to the fridge. And sometimes, on quiet nights when Lily's asleep and the house is still, I think about that rainy night at O'Malley's. I think about how different things might be if I'd made a different choice. If I'd left Richard in that parking lot. If I dumped him on the couch and walked away. I think about how one small decision, one moment of seeing someone who needed to be seen, it changed everything. Not just for me. For Richard. For Sarah. For Lily. For all of us. The rain's stopped now, by the way. Hasn't rained like that in months. But sometimes, when I hear it tapping against the window at night, I smile. Because I remember. And I'm grateful.